in addition to what we were just talking about, coping with COVID, the stress, the anxiety, all the nuances that are happening around. There's some terrible things that are happening to families right now, right? So let's elaborate and let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, we can even go before COVID, and we can see how COVID has just exacerbated what's happening. Right?
Exactly.
So, earlier we were talking about what typically happens in a crisis, and that is when you have a crisis, whether it's something associated with something like an outbreak, the 9/11 event, any of those sorts of things that shock the system. Typically what happens is people grab onto technology and accelerate technology changes and trends that were already in place. So one of the trends that was found before COVID that directly ties to this stress and this anxiety that we're seeing is associated with what we've seen with suicide rates, right? So just consider the things that have happened. We're going to put young adults and children aside for a moment, right? Remember the movie Breaking Bad? We were talking about that about Netflix earlier, right? It was kind of funny, in terms of the conversations about the whole idea of this kind of chemistry professor getting swept into the meth environment, right? And making meth. But on the other hand, if you think about what's really underlying there, it's inequality. It's growing amount of inequality, right? And whether it's the teacher that's a chemistry teacher that doesn't get any respect, or whether it's the average Joe in a factory, middle America, the folks that have been left aside as automation, globalization, manufacturing overseas has taken away the jobs. We've seen a growing amount of inequality. And inequality, the direct results tied to that is we've seen an increase in stress levels. We've seen an increase in anxiety. Across all parts of the United States.
Or PSD.
Yes, exactly. And we're seeing that manifested in terms of how people are reaching out and using drugs, right? The heroin addiction that we're seeing across that whole epidemic around heroin addiction has been accelerated. More recently, what they're starting to find is that those heroin addicts that before would have a buddy, a partner to kind of help them, is now taking without being around a partner, right? A buddy to help in case they have an overdose.
Right.
So they're seeing an uptick already in deaths associated with coronavirus and drug overdoses. The other thing that we started to see before coronavirus hit, and that's been accelerated by coronavirus, is the number of young adults, particularly young women. The rate of suicide has doubled since 2000 to 2017. The rate of suicide for young women has grown like an average of 13% per year and has doubled during that time frame.
And what do you think it's attributed to?
So there are a number of different factors that are contributing to that, but one of the items that they find striking is that although you can see these kind of increases, and you also see it in the males, young boys and young men, it's growing about 7% a year. Hasn't quite doubled as it has for young women and young girls, but social media is a very strong part, right?
Absolutely.
They can see the connection to the fact that young girls and young adults, women, they tend to take their cues from social media, whether it's the influencers, whether it's the bullying, all the cues around fashion and shaming.
Weight loss.
Weight loss, right.
A
lot of the misogyny also is tied to that, right? And online and how that impacts women and young girls. You can look at the iPhone, right? There's been some research showed that around 2008, 2008 is when the iPhone came out. Since that time, you see an acceleration. Even though these trends have been going up, you really see the biggest acceleration after 2008, 2009, when the iPhone was released. So there's increasing evidence around the use of the social media, the iPhones, and technology, and constant access to it. Right.
Yeah. That's huge.
Yes.
And even when we start talking about some of the ones that are not so, I mean, none of it's glamorous, but the ones that are even more atrocious, like sex trafficking.
Yes.
The sex trafficking, the number
sex trafficking has been increasing.
It's actually double-digit increase, I should say, and $100 million profits just for sexual exploitation. Never mind the other nuances around that. But it's still
$100 billion, just with a B, just so everybody got that right. $100 billion.
Exactly. And it's something that there needs to be something that needs to be done, and I'm not sure if we are attacking the issue fast enough. Can you elaborate on that? What do you think about that, and how does everything else that we're going through right now, and what can we actually do to help?
Well, they
that
see
with
some of the same
families?
factors. They see homelessness, right? They see the homelessness. They see the poverty trends that have increased, that have impacted a lot of America as the middle class is eroding in this country, right? Those trends are now being exacerbated and being
Right.
accelerated with coronavirus. There's already data that's showing that during this pandemic around the world, apparently human traffic is beginning to show an
Yeah.
increase. And when we, back to the point around the young women, it's bigger than just the fact that they've suffered this stress associated with technology and anxiety and social media. But one of the other things that they're seeing in college, right? For the first time in a lot of colleges, they're having to have an increasing number of counselors for the youth.
Yes.
They're
Very much
seeing
so.
a lot of challenges around anxiety counseling. Many of the people who are going into the work centers for the first time,
Sure.
they started seeing these similar types of trends in terms of the anxiety levels with young adults. They also have seen harm done, not necessarily a suicide, but maybe
Right.
that first sign where you cut yourself, do those sorts of behaviors.
Right.
They're seeing an increase in that in hospitals across the nation. So this is not something that's just something that should be taken lightly. This is something that is growing in importance, and there are some questions as to whether or not another factor, kind of around the helicopter parenting.
I was going to say, let's take a
Culture.
step back even before college, right?
Right,
Like you're
exactly.
talking about helicopter parenting. Yeah.
So if you look at the helicopter parenting, one of the things that they're starting to understand, and this kind of gets back to one of the other questions we had about looking back at your history, right?
Yep.
So if you look back, and they asked a question, right? They asked a question for the individuals, and let's say just in the United States versus worldwide, because it's a little bit different for people in other countries. But for the United States, if they look at an audience, and we ask the individuals, if you're born before 85, you may have an audience of 1,000, 2,000 people. If you're born before 85, raise your
Right.
hand, and then answer this question, right? When was the first time that you were allowed to go out on your own, right? Walk down the street, go to the store, whatever, on your own.
Yeah.
Most
6,
say
7 years
6,
old,
7
right?
years old,
Yeah,
right? That's what I
exactly.
did,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
For you, right?
yeah.
I think it was 5 years old because my sister was 6
Yeah,
years old.
we
I
were
got on the
walking
bus one
school,
time.
yeah,
We were
we were
at.
walking school.
So 5, 6 years old, right? We're on our own going out, and you ask the same question of those born after 95, and guess what that number tends to be.
In the teens.
Yeah,
most
exactly.
likely. What?
Definitely into the teens, well into the teens.
14,
12,
15?
13, 14 years old,
Yeah.
right before they're getting their first chance to actually be on their own. And so this kind of helicopter parenting mentality, and also kind of structured play, right? They're
Sure.
forcing kids to structure and guide them on everything they do, check every single thing they do in their homework, not giving them this unstructured environment. And that's what's contributing to
right.
a lot of these stresses too. So now you're thrust into a coronavirus epidemic where there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of ambiguity. There aren't clear answers. This is contributing to the stress levels.
So let's go back to the helicopter parenting. What contributed that? You have these two groups of people born in, let's say, a span of 10-year difference, and all of a sudden we have the helicopter parents. Why do you think, and it's usually our generation, the Gen X people, the Gen X parents that are the helicopter parents now. So what
Yeah, what do you
what
guys do?
contributed
What
to
did you
that?
guys do?
Exactly. That was exactly. So I'm thinking about what contributed to that. What would you say?
Yeah, there are a number of factors, and then I think you can probably chime in from some of your experiences as well. But the first, that I've heard people talk about, right? One is just this kind of this belief that you need to overprotect.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
The increasing amount of competition. Just think about this, right?
Yeah.
Post World War II, when I was in the Air Force, right? I was in the Air Force at the time that the Berlin Wall fell.
Right.
I was at the time flying jets down in Arizona. I was going through pilot training, and some of the initial
Sure.
shocks. We were beginning to see these things happen. These things happened with the former Soviet Union. We were kind of aware of these things in the military, and so about a year later, sure enough, the wall fell.
Right.
And so when the Berlin Wall fell, that forced a lot of changes. Right? They called it the peace dividend. The peace dividend led to a dramatic reduction in the Defense Department's budget, and it led to the closing of almost every base. I would say almost 70% of the military bases that I used to either visit or I was stationed at have gone away. They no longer exist, right?
Wow.
Williams Air Force Base,
70%.
pilot training base, it's
Wow.
gone, right? McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento, big 14,000
Yep.
person logistics center,
Gone.
it's gone. Basic point around this, right? We see all these changes that are associated with the reduction in the forces in the military, but what that meant was that there was an increase in competition on every single child today. Every single child today is more stressed out about future jobs and where they're going to end up, right?
Sure,
And so
sure.
consequently, the parents are going in and doing everything they can to prepare their students, prepare their children, the teachers, right? They're doing everything they can to
Yeah.
prepare their students for this new reality. Right? You look at the number, 3 billion new competitors entered the market when the former Soviet Union collapsed, right? That brought in a huge number of people.
Yep, absolutely.
India
Sure
entered the
did.
market.
Yep.
China entered
China.
the market, right?
Yep.
And so for the first time, these kids are feeling a lot more stresses than any other generation has faced prior to that. Then we have the mass shootings, right? Started with
Oh, yeah.
Columbine, right?
Yep.
Colorado.
I was going to say that.
And
Absolutely.
and look what's happened in terms of how this nation has just evolved to the point where 50 or 100 people getting shot, 40 people getting shot, those types of things. It became second hat, right? In fact, many cases, if you didn't have at least 50 or 60 people being shot, it wouldn't even show up on the news, right? And now we're at a point that we've absorbed that and say, oh well, if we get 1,000 people or 2,000 or 1,200 or 14 people dead in a day, right? Yeah, maybe that's not so bad, right?
Exactly.
So all of these things, of course, those are going to have anxiety and stress on the children.
Big time.
And as their parents feel those things and try to overprotect, then they're going to do everything they can to make sure that their kids survive. And that, again, puts a kid in an environment where they're being over-controlled, they're not being allowed to explore, they're not being allowed to play in unstructured environments and really grow up.
Right.
Many of the college professors say that the kids that come into their classes seem to be 5 or 7 years behind the students that
Yes.
that they've had in past generations,
Yeah.
as an example.
Yeah. There's a lot more written about this in the book and a lot more different angles as well. So thank you very much for elaborating on that and look forward to hearing more.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.